Hello, my name is Dejan Boshkov, Grandmaster from Bulgaria. Today I would like to show you one of my games against a very strong opponent. His name is Chao. He's a player from China and he's rated around 2700. It's always a pleasure to play against players like that because you can learn a lot of things, not only about the play itself and the moves that the opponent is going to present, but also about yourself, and you can learn from your mistakes eventually. This was played in New Zealand, the tournament in Queenstown, and this was the fifth round. When we met, we were both sharing the lead with 4-4. That's not the first time that I meet Li Chao, and the previous time I also had white. The first game was a disaster. I lost a pawn on move 12 or 14 very early. I just blundered the pawn, and I expected that he's going to play the same thing here, that he will play d6, what he usually does. But since against the move e6 I'm usually trying to avoid the main theoretical paths, he decided to choose this move, e6. And I didn't see it in the base, he didn't play it before, so this was a kind of surprise, and I was wondering what exactly he prepared for. One thing that I play here is the move b3 and then bishop b2, another is the move c4, another is the move c3. Sometimes I go for the main lines, by the way, with d4, but at the end I decided to go for the move d3, the reverse King's Indian defense, which I didn't play for a very long time, so I thought that he might not be very well prepared here. He chooses a very solid central approach, and then he decided to fianchetto the bishop. This is a method that I have once faced a long time ago. I think it was in a rapid tournament in France, in Orec. I played it against a very strong grandmaster from Russia, Glek, and he explained to me that this is the way that the Armenian players face this opening. Black's idea is that in general if white goes for the move e5, which is something that he usually does in these positions, after knight d7 there is a general problem with the pawn on e5, and say queen e2, queen c7, black is already having 4 hits against the pawn, while white is having just 3, and there are no more pieces that can come and help the pawn to be defended in a good way. So e5 here is not working, and some preparation is needed, and I need to play c3, but then black just played a5. So what he generally likes is to play on the queen's flank. This is one idea. Another is he wants to develop his pieces, he wants to play b6, and before developing the bishop on b7 or on a6, he might even bring his rook along the 7th rank, and this is an idea that Kasparov have used once even. So I stopped the pawn first of all, and well, there is a very nice square that I might use in the future. He played b6, and I decided to change the structure. Well, I can go e5 and d4 still, but he's going also to have an internal square for the knight here, and the bishop is quickly coming on a6, then maybe even to d3. And not to forget his counter-attacking ideas with f6. I think that black should be quite good here, so I decided to take on d5, changing the course of the game. Black has a choice, either to take with the pawn, which he did in the game, or to take with the knight. Taking with the knight is giving me the c4 square, and this is really reverse King's Indian. But a good one for white, who managed to block the pawn on b5. These pawns are not ideally placed, these pawns, and the queen can go to b3 to attack the pawn on b6 somewhere in the future. This is playable though for black. Okay, he chose the other move, he takes d5, and now we'll give you some time to try to find the plan that I chose, the move and the plan connected with it. Okay, if you need more time, you can pause the videos. The move that I chose, I think, is the best in this position, is the move knight b1. It's kind of unexpected that the knight is moving back to the initial position, but the idea is very solid. The knight is going to a3 and after that to b5. We have seen these pawns have been advanced already, so the knight is going to be stable on the b5 outpost, and from b5 it is going to have very strong influence on black's position. Everything else, I think, is not that strong. For example, knight b3, there is an idea like that with the d4, or then black can simply develop bishop g4, queen d7. If c4, he plays d4, and if I go d4, he goes c4 himself, the other way around, just winning some tempos, which means that most probably he's going to be faster when he's playing in the center. I'm just losing time. If knight goes on f1, which is also very reasonable, then it's hard to imagine a good career for this knight. And black can again just play bishop f5, queen d7, rook to e8, and he has very good position in any case. Well, knight b1 is definitely posing some troubles for him. Well, first of all, he develops, this is very normal, and after knight a3 he decided not to stop my knight from reaching b5. He could have done this with a move like knight a7, but then the knight is abandoning the center and I can immediately take use of that and bring my knight on e5. And then knight b5 is coming anyways. Once the black trades on b5 himself, I can just take back with the pawn and I'm going to have a very nice square on c6 for my knight from e5. Therefore, Chao played the most normal move, queen d7, eventually intending to trade the bishops and also connecting the rooks. The rooks are coming into the center. I jumped knight b5 and he played knight h5. Another move is bishop h3, of course, to which I can either take it or play bishop f4. So maybe first taking it will bring the queen to a very active square, and that's why I thought I will play bishop f4. And now the thing is that here black might have sometimes problems with his pawns on the queen's flank, and this is one other good point for the move knight b5. And if he doesn't play rook e8, if he tries somehow to cover this square, say that he goes rook c8, then the d6 square is also vulnerable. I can bring my bishop there. I'll first just play queen d2, maybe double the rooks on the e-file, maybe alternatively play bishop h6 like he did. And now there is also another very nice idea, knight e5 in this situation for white. So I think that white should be somewhat better in this case. Knight h5 is taking away the f4 square from the bishop. So white goes d4 this time, and makes use of the fact that the knight is no longer on f6. If the knight was on f6, it can jump to e4, and this would be nice for black, but here I can do it. And black has a choice now what to do. First of all, he can take the pawn on d4, but this is something that white is very happy to see. After knight takes d4, or maybe the other knight takes on d4, knight takes and knight takes. This is a very good version of the French defense. Okay, not only French, such positions can arise from many openings, but the pawn on d5 is isolated and white managed to white pieces, which is generally good for him. That pawn on d5 is likely to become a weakness, so I think that white is slightly better here. The move that he played in the game was rook a8. He brought a rook on the open file, but I think that this is a mistake. You will see why. Rook f8 was more to the point. And in that case, after d takes c5, b takes c5, and bishop e3, he has a chance to defend the pawn with the move bishop f8, something that he didn't have during the game. And after queen d2, we can say that the position is unclear. Both of the sides have their chances. White is going to bring his piece into the center, rook a1 to attack the pawn on d5. Maybe bishop h6 in the future, maybe knight h4, but black also has his own chances. He can bring his knight back into the game, then eventually to come on e4, and he has also a very good center. It is a bit shaky, but it is quite impressive at the same time, quite strongly looking. Well, what happened in the game, here's a very concrete flaw. Rook a8 was answered d takes c5, and I guess that Chao just blundered that if he first trades on e1, I can take it back with the knight, when suddenly the pawn on d5 is hanging, and white is just winning a pawn. Say bc5, queen takes d5, and he doesn't have enough compensation for that pawn. He cannot bring pieces quickly and try to mate me on the back rank. This means that d takes c5 should be answered b takes c5, which was the course of the game. But after bishop e3, it becomes apparent that this pawn is hanging, and there is no way for him to save it. The queen cannot defend it. Again, the knight is taking away some squares, and also well, there is no other piece that can defend the pawn. If he goes c4, then I think that the problem was bishop c5, and again the same thing, rook takes d1. I don't really remember if knight takes d1 was still the move, but I think it was, because here after bishop b6 the rook is hanging, and if he keeps on attacking the bishop goes to c7, rook takes b5 can be answered a takes b, and this knight is hanging at the same time, while if the rook is coming here, then white just takes on d5 and the knight on c6 is hanging in the end, so black doesn't really have time to take too many times on c7 as the knight on c6 is hanging. Which means that black is in trouble and he needs to sacrifice the pawn. He did that with the move d4. At least this is trading the c3 pawn and at the same time turns this piece into a very good one. In return for the pawn, I naturally took the pawn and took on d4 with the knight, of course not with the bishop, as then the remaining piece on d4 will be hanging and black is not in danger anymore. In fact, he might be even winning here. So knight takes d4 was played, and he started to defend extremely well from here on. That's one very good thing about the 2700 players. They rarely lose games, not only because they do not allow it to reach them, but even if they go into very bad situations, they keep on fighting and they keep on finding resources almost to the end of the game. The same Chao pulled out a lost position in the final round. Okay, before that he was probably close to winning, but then he pushed too hard. He was losing, but he managed to save the game anyways. Bishop g4 he played. Bishop e4 is another move, but in that case knight b5 is just a much better version of the endgame that we're about to see, because even though black is taking back the pawn at once, after bishop a5 he is no longer able to protect the pawn on a5, and that remaining a4 pawn is going to be extremely strong, because here rook a8 can be answered knight c7, all the squares have been taken away from the rook, and the pawn on a5 is finally lost. So bishop g4 is the course of the game. I played bishop c6. This is useful to bring the queen to a worse position. Queen came to c8 as the only move, and here I think I made my first mistake. I decided to simplify the situation, which generally speaking is a good idea, and because I wanted to win without any risk. But then when I started this game at home, I realized that queen d3 would be much stronger. Because after rook d8, rook ac1, rook d6, it's seemingly very dangerous for the first player. This pins along the d file, but black is having also alternative problems, and that pin can be easily broken by just playing queen to c4, and after rook d8, white just goes knight b5. And the remaining pieces on the board are much more active for white rather than for black. Well, in any case, this is not really a huge mistake that I did. I think I will still have my chances even after bishop to f3, but it's food for thought in the future. Can you really win a game without giving any chances to a 2700 player? Knight f6, rook c1, a good move, bringing the rook into the action. With the tempo, he took on f3, I took on c8, and we went into this endgame. An endgame with an extra pawn, but after knight d5, there are obvious problems for the first player. The bishop is hanging, the knight is hanging, and this bishop also doesn't have too many squares. These the f4 and the e3 are taken by the knight, and if I go bishop to g5, something that we studied after the game in this situation, he can play h6. And again, the bishop doesn't have too many squares. Knight c6 though is a nice move here for white to counterattack, and this is giving good chances for a win. Say knight b4 just takes, he takes on g5. This is a good piece to take. Knight c6. We studied these things. White is going to win a pawn, the one on g5 or the one on a5, but black is definitely going to have very good drawing chances because the bishop is a very mighty piece. And sometimes he can even liquidate into rook endgame, which is most likely to be a draw. By the way, let me just show you that bishop c1 is simply refuted with bishop takes d4, and rook gives a check, and this guy is kinging, and after that he's also going to take this pawn while I'm taking the one on a5, but this should be a draw. And actually here he might have something even better, something like knight b6 first. Yes, I think that this was the thing that didn't let me play the move bishop c1. The pawn on a4 is hanging and the bishop on c1 is hanging, just like before, which means that white needs to go back with the knight on c6, on b3, and then everything is traded, and this is a very simple draw. Other ideas for the first play in this situation? Somehow to defend the bishop. In the game I defended it with rook d3. Knight c2 is not working because he just takes it and takes the pawn on b2. So I need to defend it with the rook. Rook d3. And the reason for not doing this, okay, I will give you some time to find out what is the tactical trick that black has here. If you need more time, yes, you can pause your videos. The tactical trick that I wasn't very sure how should it end is knight e3. And after f takes e3, he just takes it with the rook. And he liquidates into this pawn endgame, which at first sight I thought it should be a draw. And the reason for that is that I calculated this line, and then I thought, okay, if I move my pawns on the king's flank and try to win some tempos by advancing the pawns, this should be a draw. He just trades too many pawns, everything will be traded. It's a draw. Just like that. However, when the game was over, I realized that there is no need at all to advance the pawns, but I can first just bring my king on the queen's flank, and well, to play b4 and to try to keep one of the pawns alive. And this is very logical. I don't know what happened. Why didn't I realize that I can do that? I think that in my calculations I missed a move, or I just calculated twice for black, and I thought that my king needs to come very quickly back on the king's flank in order to stop the pawn from becoming a queen. But at home, when you have extra time, you can just calculate this in a better way, and you see that the pawn on h5 is in fact winning the game here. Just that pawn will be left on the board in the end, and the black king is too far away. The pawn is promoted. Well, this is not that important. This only comes to show that the grandmasters are also making mistakes in their calculations, much more than you might think of. But I want to praise Chao, who actually felt that this should be lost, and he didn't calculate that deeply, but he decided, he was thinking to play in this situation, not to take on e3, but to play knight to b4 in that position. Not knight takes e3, but knight b4, which is still giving him very good chances for a draw. After rook d2, knight d5, we have the same situation as before, but in a better version for white. Actually, I want to achieve this because my rook is now defending the pawn on b2, and I can do a move like knight f5. Once that he trades on e3, I take back, and I thought, okay, I can pull this. I mean, I can play knight c4, try to take this pawn, maybe b3, maybe rook d3, I can organize this. But in reality, well, black is also having his counter chances. He's counter-attacking here, he's trading a pawn, and then we analyze this for maybe half an hour. It seems like black should survive. The bishop is too good in this position, even though white is having an extra pawn and an outside pass pawn, but that bishop is a very powerful piece. So most probably this should be a draw with correct play, but of course very good practical chances for a win. Well, what happened into the game after knight d5 was that I went knight c6. I decided to liquidate into a position which I calculated thoroughly, but I missed something very simple in my analysis, in my calculations. After bishop b2, knight a5, the line that I was heading for was the move rook takes e3. knight c4, this rook endgame, in which my rook is behind the pawn and my pawn is advanced. This rook needs to go sooner or later in front of the pawn, where it will be on a very passive position, and the arising pawn endgame should be normally won for me. Here is one analyze that I have calculated. g4, I want to block the pawns. If I manage to block the pawns, this should be very easily won after that. So black is more or less forced to play f6, king d4, king c6. And now I think an important move is not to allow rook d7 check, and then the king is coming in front of the pawn, but to play first king c4, and after king b6, king d5, with chances for win to take these pawns while he's trying to take mine. And here rook d7 check can be answered king e6, and then I'm taking the pawn. Well, there are also other lines. It's very complicated. I can say that even after the analysis, I couldn't really understand if this is winning for white or not. Let's say that the chances for win for white are 50% and the chances for draw for black are 50% as well. But this all is irrelevant, because in this position black has a much better move, which is immediately finishing the game in a draw, and this is rook to not e3 but e4, just one square behind that pawn, but black is taking the more important one on a4 after that, and the game is of course a complete draw after that. The following moves were not that necessary. I'm just bringing the knight around the king, and black can do nothing, neither can do I. The pawns are on the same side. We can say that black is marginally better, but of course there is not enough material to play for win, so we agreed to draw at this moment. What can I say about this game? First thing, we can always play for win against a very strong opponent as well. 2700 players, they are also human beings. They also tend to make mistakes. One inaccuracy can be decisive sometimes, but whenever you play with anyone, it doesn't really matter how strong he is. You should play the best moves, and you should play the principled moves, not always to choose continuations which are giving chances for your opponent. Even though they are risk-free, if they give chances for them, try to avoid them and try to play the best moves anyways. Okay, thanks for your attention and see you the next time.